Hi everyone, my name is Tobeka, and today I'm with a human rights advocate from America by the name of Mr. Matthew Friedman. He's a human rights advocate, and his expertise is human trafficking and modern slavery. He's also a chief executive officer for an organization called the Mekong Club, and it's an organization based in Hong Kong and mobilizes the private sector about human trafficking and modern slavery. Thank you for being here, Mr. Friedman.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you so much. So I was very interested in your journey of being a human rights advocate in terms of human trafficking. And I just want you to explain to the audience how you got into this arena and how has it changed your life?
Well, I wasn't one of those senior roles that said when I grow up, I want to be an activist. In fact, I did everything I could not to be.
Mhm.
But about 30 years ago, I took a job in Nepal for the US government. I was a public health officer, and my job was basically to take resources and translate that into healthier people.
Mhm.
At that time, we were finding girls that were 12, 13 years old who were HIV positive. We couldn't understand what was going on because that particular disease was not a part of the kind of Nepalese culture. It's a very conservative culture. And so we went to go and interview the women and the girls. What we basically heard was the same story over and over again. And it went something like this. Human trafficker would go into a village, flash a bunch of money around, and say, I'm looking for a wife. I don't want an urban wife, I want a village wife. He'd find a girl, 12, 13 years old, befriend her, and then go to the family and say, I'd like to marry your daughter. They're thinking, wow, he's rich, he's handsome, he's going to take care of our daughter, he's going to take care of us. Everybody's happy. A couple of days later, they actually have a wedding ceremony. The entire
Mhm.
community is there. After that, he says to the family, I'm going to take your daughter to the capital, Kathmandu, but don't worry, I'll be back in a couple of months. But that isn't what's going to happen. Most of them are taken to Mumbai, India, to the red light district where the brothels are. He takes her there, he puts her in a room, and he says, honey, stay here. I'll be back in a few minutes. She's thinking, no, well, why are you going? I'm scared. I saw these
Yeah.
people. Don't leave me. He says, it's okay. I'll be right back. He then goes to the madam to get the $500 for having sold her to the brothel. He has the gold from the wedding, and he hands the wedding pictures over. He then leaves to go to Nepal to do this again and again, maybe 40, 50 times in a year.
Mm.
After that, the madam goes into the room where the girl is and says, guess what? Your husband just sold you to me, and you're going to be with 15, 20 guys a day because I say so. You can imagine her shock. No, 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 my
Yeah.
husband loves me. Oh, that's what happened. When she comes to internalize this, many of them say, I'll kill myself before I do those shameful things. The madam then brings out the photographs of the wedding and says, this is your mother, your father, your brother. If you hurt yourself, we'll hurt them. So she's trapped in this situation. To make her into a prostitute, it's quite simple. You shame
Mhm.
her. So they bring in a couple of professional rapists. In a 2-day period of time, they'll rape this 12-year-old girl 20, 30, 40 times until eventually she just lays back and accepts whatever happens to her. After that, she's put on the line, which means that she will be with 10, 12, 15, 20 guys a day, every day. So I was hearing this story over and over again, but I didn't understand the evil of it until I actually went to those brothels. I was invited by the Indian government to do public health checks. I had a
Mhm.
police officer with me. Went into one of the brothels and there was an 11-year-old trafficking victim. This girl saw this Caucasian guy, saw an opportunity, literally ran up and wrapped herself around me and said, save me, save me. They're doing terrible things to me. I turned to the police officer and I said, we need to get this girl out of here. He says, well, we can't do that. She was standing there hysterically crying, wearing a dress 20 sizes too big because she was a child in the adults world. He said that if we tried to leave, they'd kill us both. To make a long story short, we left. We came back with a lot more police, but of course she was gone. Now, I tell this story because every once in a while in life we are tested. This was my big test. I should have gotten that girl out. I didn't. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus on anything. And eventually did what a lot of activists do. I just surrendered to the fact that now that I know about this, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And 30 years later, here I am talking to you. So how has it changed my life? Well, I wanted to live the good life, do really well in my career and make a lot of money and get a big house and have a bunch of kids and, la da 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 da, all the things that everybody else does. But when you become an activist, a lot of that changes. You get very involved in your work. You are focusing on trying to make the world a better place for a lot of people. There are a lot of failures and a lot of things that happen. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't change anything about my life. I mean, every minute of it has been amazing, because to be in a situation where you can get paid to work, to help to make the world a better place, wow, that's an amazing thing.
Wow. Your story nearly brought tears to my eyes because it's very emotional, and it's hard to understand why would humans do this to each other to such an extent. And I can only imagine the trauma that you've also experienced, in terms of the 11-year-old little girl that you weren't able to save. And I just wanted to ask, how does that affect your mental health? So, for example, um, now that you've witnessed all these things over the years, do you think that your mental health has been strained because of this?
Well, I probably burnt out about 3 times. I got to a point where we had significant raids and rescues that didn't happen, and people either lost their lives or were not able to be saved. And it just, when you have this continuous series of events that you want to have happen, not happen, and a lot of the police not engaging and the raid not taking place and us not finding the right people, you can't help but have that basically draw you down. So there were a couple of times when I said, I'm never going to do this again. I'm leaving this career. I'm just too sad. I'm too depressed. But, I fell down 7 times and I got up 8 times.
Yeah.
Eventually what happens is you just begin to say, well, wait a minute, maybe we can do something a little bit different. Maybe we can try it a little bit different. And as a result of that, you just start over, and then you begin to gain a certain amount of momentum.
Yeah.
As part of that process, you develop self-preservating mechanisms that allow you to protect yourself from the next time you might have that kind of a situation. But for me, I'm an eternal optimist. Even though there's 40 million people in modern slavery and we're only helping 0.2% of them, I attribute that to the fact that we just haven't come up with the right formula yet. We will, and when we do, everything will get better. If I didn't believe that, I think I would continue to get burned out. But I really do feel like the world, when they hear about this, when they're exposed to this, more people will care, more people will step up, more people will get involved, and that's when the big changes will come.
It's interesting that you say that there's 40 million slaves around the world and we're only helping the 0.02% of victims. Why is that? And who exactly are the main participants of human trafficking? Is it organized criminals? Do we find that perhaps our politicians are involved, as a lot of people do create those sort of conspiracies to say that, hey, the government is involved in human trafficking? Who exactly are the participants of this crime?
Well, there's about 500,000 criminals out there. For sex trafficking, these would be gangs. These would be syndicates that are often involved in organized crime. On the forced labor side, it would just be bad businesses, businesses that are trying to take advantage of individuals and to basically force them into a situation where they work and they don't get paid. There's about 500,000 of them against about 20,000 people like us, who work full-time to address modern slavery. The amount of money that's generated from modern slavery is 150 billion US dollars a year. The amount of money that's used to fight it is about 350 million US. That's 0.23% of the profits. And to put this into perspective, in the United States, we eat a lot of potato chips, $6 billion worth. It takes 21 days of potato chip eating in the United States to come up with the amount of money that's used globally to address modern slavery, you can see
Wow.
what we're up against. The profits are this big, the amount of money to address it is this big. The number of people who are criminals is this big, the number of people fighting it is this big. And so as a result of that, we are outgunned. And as a result of that,
Wow.
that's why we're at 0.2% of the victims helped. So out of 40 million, about 100,000 people are helped around the world.
Wow. And where does our judiciary system come into play? And why do we find that perpetrators of this crime don't get convicted and that victims are now left or stranded without any additional incentives?
I mean, a lot of law enforcement people look at prostitution as a nuisance. It's something that's been around for a long time. Often the women are perceived to be part of the criminal activity.
Mhm.
And even when sex trafficking takes place, it's hard to get the women to say, I'm sex trafficked and this is the guy who did it to me because of threats associated with her. So, you don't see a lot of kind of cases moving forward with that. When it comes
Yes.
to forced labor cases, the police don't see this as part of their responsibility. This is a labor issue. The labor inspector should be doing this. And so
Yes.
as a result of that, the labor inspectors, there's not a lot of them in any given country. They don't have a lot of power and control. And so maybe they find cases and they find the company, but a lot of people don't get arrested as a result of that. So systems and procedures need to change in order to allow for the law enforcement people to be more involved in this. But for that to happen, the general public has to care about this. They have to put
Mm.
emphasis on this. There has to be pressure on the system to take this very seriously.
That's very true because I was personally doing a study on child sex tourism, and I was very disgusted at how easily it is for pedophiles to travel from one country to another to engage in sexual activity with young children, maybe as young as 10 years old. And they usually travel to these underdeveloped countries in Africa or in the Americas. And there's just no law whatsoever to protect these young children. And sometimes children are driven by poverty to go into prostitution or to all these sexual activities that are very wrong. And I often wonder why, as a society, why aren't we making so much noise about human trafficking? Because we often focus on slavery that happened in history, but somehow
Yes.
what happens today is something that we don't take seriously. And
Okay, let me talk about the difference between human trafficking and modern slavery.
mhm,
About 30 years ago, when we were seeing cases where women were being trafficked from one location to another or transported and then sold, the terminology human trafficking came up because trafficking equates movement of something. Like
mhm,
drug trafficking, you take the drugs, you move them to another location, you sell them. Human trafficking, you take a human being, move them from one place to another and sell them.
mhm,
And so human trafficking was the initial terminology because we thought it was basically cross-border. You had to go from one country to another. Gradually over time, we said, well, wait a minute, there are cases of people going from one country to another, but even within the country, you have situations where a person goes from one district to another, or in a city from one side of the street to the other. And
mhm,
so people were saying, well, wait a minute, it doesn't matter if a person moves. Isn't the end point of the movement important? And so when you look at the end point, is a person doesn't get paid, they can't leave, they're threatened, there's debt associated with it, it's all illegal and fraudulent. What do you call that? Well, the closest terminology to that is slavery. But because of what you said, most people think slavery happened a long time ago. They put the word modern next to it. So
mhm.
modern slavery is different from slavery that we knew of 200 years ago, but it has the same elements. A person
Yes.
can't get paid, a person can't leave, a person is held in place. In fact, we have more slaves today than any other time in history. More slaves than there are
Wow.
Canadians. You know,
Wow.
there's 40 million people in modern slavery around the world. 25,000 people enter per day or a new slave every 4 seconds. If you count 1, 2, 3, 4, somewhere in the world, somebody's entering into modern slavery. and the drum beats on and on and on. So what we're dealing with here is a significant issue, but a lot of people simply don't know much about the details associated with this.
Yes.
If they did, I think there would be a lot more pressure to address the issue.
That's very true. A lot of people really don't know about slavery. In fact, I used to get questions such as, when I tell people about human trafficking, I would get questions such as, but why don't these people escape on their own? And what people don't understand is that it's a trap. You can't, it's not something where, for example, if I'm not getting paid in a certain job, I just can't walk away from because my family's being threatened or my life is being threatened. So people have this idea that victims put themselves into this situation, which is not true.
Yeah, I mean, they may have been ignorant, which got them into the
Mm,
situation, but that's often because people don't have the information to protect themselves. But let's say that somebody threatened your mother. They said, if you try to leave, we are going to hurt your mom or your dad or your brother. Certainly, if you thought that they were serious, you would take that quite seriously. And who wouldn't basically do the work simply to prevent something bad from happening to somebody we really love and care about? So you can see the power that they have over people. Threats can
that's
be
true.
amazingly, devastatingly effective because we don't want bad things to happen to our family members.
That's very true. And I wanted to ask as well, why do we find that men and young boys are alienated from the cause as victims? Because as much as I do understand that women and young girls make up the majority of the statistics in human trafficking, but it seems that we tend to other young victims or male victims and boys from the crime. And why is that? Does it mean that young boys are not getting trafficked as well, or what is the main issue for us to alienate them from being victims?
Well, I mean, the thing is, because women and girls have kind of a sense of innocence and importance within societies and they have to be protected, then you see more emphasis on women and girls. But in reality, about 45% of the victims are women and girls, and 55% are men and boys. When you add forced labor into the situation, you know, in for example, certain locations in Africa, you'll see boys
Mm,
that are forced into fishing, you know, that have to swim underwater to release the nets. Many of them die. You see situations where young boys are forced onto cocoa plantations.
mhm,
Many of them lose fingers because they're using machetes at 7 or 8 years old. You see situations where boys are even kind of trafficked into sexual exploitation.
mm,
But, you know, for whatever reason, people don't want to talk about that issue. It's just, it seems shameful. It seems like, well, if they're boys, it's not a big deal. You know,
mhm.
they can run away from it, but the girls can't. All of these things contribute to a sense of when it comes to this issue, it's more about women and girls and less
Mhm.
about men and boys, but it's equally important for both
Yes.
categories.
Yes. And what would you say should be the main priority in terms of creating awareness about human trafficking and child trafficking? Um, as much as we have all these organizations that are trying to fight it, why is it that we're not as successful as we would want to be, considering that we're now at that 0.02% mark? Is it because maybe we're not putting a lot of effort, or is it because organizations are lacking the resources to fight the crime?
I think it's a couple of things. One is that I think sometimes people who make up the trainings and the awareness raising approaches don't understand kind of the science of communication, what really opens people's minds and hearts. A second thing is if somebody stands in front of a village and talks to them about this issue, but they're talking to a community where all of the men who have migrated come back and say, we don't have a problem, then people are going to say, well, what are you talking about? None of our men have this problem. But in reality, many of them have been trafficked. Many of
Mm,
them come back and they don't tell anyone because they don't want to lose face. So face results in a lot of people lying about their experience. If it was me and I had money to address modern slavery for prevention and awareness raising, I would invest in dramas, like a soap opera. And I've done this all across Asia where I do 10 hours of drama. You know, you have the mother and the father and the kids and the person who gets trafficked and the other person who's protected because he does all the right things. And you go through a particular scenario, seeing these people in a dramatic situation, which is closer to what we resonate and understand, allows people to come to understand what the issue is and what needs to be done. So, you know, there are techniques that can be done to really educate people. And the interesting thing is that you can put that on a CD, you can put it on a thumb drive, you can show it on television. It'll be shown and watched and listened to over and over and over again. Those types of approaches give you enough time to see why did somebody get protected and why did somebody not get protected, and why are we not hearing anything about the people who went off and got trafficked? Well, it's because they don't want to be shamed. And so that's why you don't hear these things.
I remember doing your sweatshop challenge at university that you created, whereby we were pretending to be these workers who were trapped into forced labor. And I found that the whole activity was very dramatic and very strong at the same time in telling the message of forced labor happening in Asian countries and even in Africa. And so, what do you think us as civil society can do to raise awareness about trafficking? Because a lot of people are scared of the 40 million number. It seems so bizarre that you kind of feel overwhelmed into engaging into helping into the advocacy. So I wanted to know what can individuals such as myself do in terms of making sure that victims are safe and engaging in the meanwhile.
Yeah, let me talk about the sweatshop challenge first. We wanted to give senior executives, that's how we started this, an opportunity to experience what forced labor would be. So from 9 o'clock at night until 6 in the morning, they would take nuts and put them on and off and on and off with no food, no water, limited bathroom breaks, no sleep, and they had to do this continuously. We started off with 300 people, only 2 people made it to the end. Now, this particular scenario isn't so different from what it would be like in the real world. And so as people are dropping out, we say, you did it for 4 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours. Imagine if you had to do this every day. Imagine if that was your life. Imagine how it feels. You only had to do it for one short period of time, but many of these people walk away with a real clear sense of, oh my gosh, this is a terrible thing, because they experience it themselves. Experiential learning is an extremely important part of helping people to understand something, not only intellectually, but in their heart as well.
Yeah.
Things you can do is, you know, simple things. Just learn about an issue and let other people know. That may not seem like much, but part of the problem is people don't know about the issue. If you don't know about something, you're not going to care. If you don't care, you're not going to do anything. There are many organizations that you can volunteer for. Some of them you have to go to the office. Many of them you can do actually from your home. And in fact, my youngest trafficking or volunteer was a girl that was 9 years old. She saw me in a documentary. She reached out to me and said, Mr. Friedman, I saw you in that documentary. I want to help. What can I do? I said, you're 9 years old. She said, so what? I said, you're 9 years old. She said 9-year-olds were the new 16-year-olds. She said, give me a chance. I said, what do you do? And she says, I can find anything on the internet. So I gave her some tasks. And sure enough, she could find anything on the internet. She was better than my second-year Yale law student. The third thing is fundraising or donating. Many of the organizations, especially during COVID, are suffering. They need help. So donating some money, just skip a meal and donate it to the right organization, or doing some type of fundraising activity is a good way of helping and contributing. All of those things do not significantly impact a person's life. They are a small contribution, but if 10 million people did those things, it would add up to something quite big. So it's related to the numbers. We need people to accept some responsibility and to do just a few things but to get a lot of people to do a few things.
Wow. And speaking about organizations, I know that you are the CEO of the Mekong Club organization. And please do tell us more about that and why target the private sector specifically.
So the private, out of the 40 million people, 25 million are in forced labor and 16 million of them are associated with supply chains, which are associated with the private sector. So the Mekong Club, the organization that I run, works with the private sector in a positive, supportive, non-naming and shaming way to educate them and inform them and give them the tools and means to be able to address the problem. So we work with the banks, we work with the manufacturers, the retailers in the hospitality sector, and we bring them together on a quarterly basis. They talk about what they think they need, and then they say, well, we need a training, and so we develop a training. Or we need an analysis of the laws, and so we'll do that. Or we need an app that basically allows us to determine whether or not migrants from another country have been trafficked. So we've developed about 27 tools. All the tools are made available to the private sector organizations we work with. And as a result of that, we're able to work effectively with the private sector in a positive, supportive way. And we have been able to use the private sector to identify human trafficking cases and to address them. And so it's just another way of addressing the problem.
That's amazing. Because I also love doing personal research on human trafficking. And another information I came across is that the cosmetic industry and the fashion industry as well, they contribute to quite a lot of the cases we see on forced labor. For example, you see children in India digging for certain resources to put in the lipsticks or the makeups that us women use. And it's quite scary to see that not a lot of accountability has been taken in that regard. And I just want to say thank you so much for being an individual who is contributing to a society whereby all these things are happening, and somehow you are literally an emblem and a light to so many victims out there who are suffering from this. And you are one of the people that inspired me to engage in the issue of human trafficking and wanting to know more in future. And what would be your main tips to individuals who want to get into this sort of industry? What would you say be prepared for in terms of working into this industry?
Well, first of all, you have to decide that that's really what you want. A lot of people graduate and they think they know what they want, but they really don't. They
Yes.
need to kind of identify what is your ideal dream job. Even if it's something that you won't have for 10 or 20 years, that needs to be your beacon, your North Star. Second thing is you need to get to know yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses, things you feel you're good at, things that you feel you're weak? You need to really look at yourself in the mirror and come to understand those things. And the third thing is, once you have a general sense of the direction and what you have bring to the table, you need to develop a plan. And the plan outlines, what do you want to do first? Do you have your CV? Have you looked at the various options? Have you searched for what a good cover letter would be? Have you identified what potential jobs are out there? Do you want to live in your country or do you want to go internationally? All of those things have to be sorted out. So it's extremely important for a person to kind of look at their postgraduate time similar to as if it's a term paper when you're still in school,
Mhm.
where you give yourself an assignment and you invest in it and you really plan and do something the same way you would when you're in an academic situation, because your education doesn't end the moment you graduate. In fact, it begins at that point, but it's a completely different type of education, which is much more invested in yourself. It's not about being graded. The grades translate into whether or not the opportunities come. That's when you're really kind of going out there and making decisions for yourself, and the world will determine whether or not you move from place to place. So, I do a lot of kind of coaching of people who are in that point in their life where they graduate and they don't really have a clue what they're going to do because they never really gave much thought to it. And they thought that it was just going to fall in place for them. And for some people it does, but a lot of people it doesn't. You have to be very much a part of your own destiny. And for that to happen, you have to contribute in yourself, in a sense.
That's very true. And just being proactive in general, because I find that a lot of youth, especially, they are so afraid of going out there and making things happen for themselves. All it just takes is contacting the right people and just putting in the effort and wanting to learn more about a specific field of interest. And speaking about coaching, if anybody wants to find you or get in touch with you, where can they? And is the organization Mekong taking in any volunteers at the moment?
We have about 70 volunteers that we work with. The way we do it is when we have a need, we allow the entire community of volunteers to determine if that's the right assignment for them. Mm-hmm. So they're on kind of a retainer. And so sometimes if it's a banking assignment, the banking people will take that. If it's a communications one, maybe somebody who has corporate social responsibility, communication skills. If it's related to social networking, we often have students who take on those types of activities. Whether it's our organization or other organizations, one of the most important post-graduation things to do is to intern if you can, if you haven't done that. Because oftentimes organizations won't hire you unless you have a little bit of experience. And the reason why they do that is they want to see whether or not you can thrive in a situation where you're doing what it is that you want to be doing. Yes. Okay, and so if you want to do international work, take an internship in another country and use that as an opportunity to demonstrate that you not only can thrive in that situation, but you've learned a lot of lessons. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that a lot of black and white. They don't realize that there's many interpersonal things that happen in an office. There's politics, there's egos, there's jealousies. It's not the kind of logical, rational, practical work that's the problem. It's navigating through that process. And so all of us have to go through that and come to terms with what it means for us. You know, and the more you engage in politics, the more you're going to have difficulties in your career. You have to find a way of not getting sucked into that world and then basically trying to just navigate in a way that it's not one group against another. And it requires a certain amount of help. And that's why mentors are important. From the time that I was starting my career, I would always go to somebody who's further along in their career. And, you know, I would find these mentors and they would help me and they would make suggestions. And that allows you to catapult yourself above many of the other issues and problems that a lot of people kind of go through themselves because somebody's giving you advice and guidance about their own experiences. And that can be very, very helpful.
Thank you so much, Mr. Friedman. Thank you for your time as well. I really did enjoy this conversation. And thank you once again for everything that you do for society in terms of human trafficking. I personally hope to be like you one day and just to be a hero and do the good deeds that society deserves.
Well, let me just say, fantastic questions, fantastic facilitation. Every time I've had conversations with you, I learned something. You're a very smart, articulate, capable person, and I have no doubt in my mind that you will be sitting here 20 years from now doing an interview, talking to somebody who's young that's asking similar questions, and you're going to be the wise, educated, experienced person providing that. And that's just, so. I expect, but I have no doubt in my mind. No, none at all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really hope to aspire to be you one day because you're just doing amazing work and I really look up to you. So thank you once again for taking the time off to be with me and doing this interview, and good luck in everything that you do.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.